we had a little technical difficulties. Welcome, I am Dr. Veronica Del Bianco with the environmental program here at Loyola University, New Orleans. We are proud to be putting on our spring roundtables. This is the first one. A little shout out to the next one will be in March, and the final one will be during Earth Week. So please join us in those. We'll have more advertisements. Also, after this, you're welcome to join us in going up and touring the greenhouse. So please, if you have time, stay and join us for that. All right, today we have two speakers. I call them speakers, but really experts who are going to talk to us. First one is Jacqueline Ricard. She's the director of the Coastal Studies and GIS Technologies at Nunez Community College, where she has led the program since 2022. She has decades of experience in the field and the classroom studying Louisiana's disappearing coast. She has recently been named the winner of the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana's 2024 Coastal Stewardship Award, say that, and SURF, the Coastal and Estuarine Science Federation's Coastal Teacher of the Year, Educator of the Year in 2025. So thank you for joining us, Jacqueline.
Thank you.
And Corey Miller is the Community Engagement Director for Pontchartrain Conservancy, formerly, what do we call it before that?
Formerly Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation.
Right, so yes. That rings a bell too. He is a third-generation New Orleanian, educated right here in New Orleans at the University of New Orleans. And then he has worked an assistantship at the Center for Hazards Assessment, Response, and Technology. Mr. Miller has more than a dozen years of experience working to improve coastal community resilience in the face of land loss, climate change, hurricanes, flooding, and a constantly changing environment. So welcome to both of you. How the format is going to work is they're each going to give us a little background with their work and research, and then we're going to sit down and have a conversation that we invite you to join in. Thank you. Jacqueline?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk to everybody about the work that I'm very fortunate to do. So I'm going to be talking today kind of about what we do at the classroom and then how we apply it out in the field with my students. So it's pretty fun, maybe a little bit more informal than you're used to as far as academics go, but definitely a good time. So just to give you a little bit of history kind of on my college. So I teach at Nunez Community College, which is a part of the Louisiana Technical Community College system. We have 12 community colleges around the state. So I'm right over there. See Nunez, we're in Chalmette, so only took me about 15 minutes to get here, which was pretty nice. And they said we're one of 12 colleges. The cool thing about this system is we get to share programs. So I am the only coastal program in the entire state at this level. So what's really great is that I develop courses. Other colleges in the system, if they find them useful or could use them, are able to adopt those courses. So it's kind of nice collaboration. Okay, next slide. So just to give you a little bit of an overview kind of on my program structure. So we have everything from 1-year degrees to 2-year degrees, because we're a community college, and our main focus is really workforce development, which is kind of unique when you think about coastal work, right? Because there's no plug and play for coastal work, right? It's not like I'm going to be an accountant and I know what I'm going to go do. There's a lot of different things that we can do in the coastal realm. And it's definitely my passion, as I have 2 children that have grown up here, to make sure that local people get local jobs. That's a really big issue we have in the coast. I'm originally from Illinois. I've lived here for almost 25 years. And you know, sometimes when I'm out in the boat, it's cool to see the Great Lakes Dredging Company, right? That's there, because like, oh, that's home. But the people here should have those jobs, right? Not people from Chicago. And so we've developed this program to kind of help students get those niche jobs. What I'm going to be focusing on today is the one in red, the Coastal Restoration Pathway, which is pretty new. We're in our 2nd cohort, so we'll be graduating our 2nd group of students this spring. Okay, next one. So it's really important that we have this program very specifically in St. Bernard Parish. We serve St. Bernard and Plaquemines. St. Bernard is losing land the fastest, right, because of the way hurricanes spin. So it's really important that we train these students, especially these, most of these students in this area come from fishing families, and so they have intimate knowledge of the coast. They may not know the technical words, right, their first day in my classroom, but they know the concepts. So being able to marry what they know with that practical application is really important. Next, we have Plaquemines Parish, which is the other parish we serve. That's where I live. I kind of split my time between the top of the parish and the bottom of the parish on the weekends. And this parish is losing land the second fastest, right? And you can see the economic agents here for both of these parishes are all on the water, right? So fishing is very important. So saving the coast is really important. And you see a lot of seafood, right? That's here. I'm sure most of you may enjoy eating seafood. And so it's really important that we maintain our 4 salinity gradients, right, all across our coast. Because if we don't, we're not going to get to enjoy that shrimp po' boy sandwich or those boiled crabs that we might like to eat. So doing this work in these parishes is pretty critical. Next slide. So before I get to our application, I want to talk to you, like I said, about that coastal restoration pathway. Because this is where we really start to dig into how we do coastal restoration and apply those nature-based solutions. And so 2 courses that we have that I'm currently teaching this semester, just got done teaching yesterday, so it's all fresh in my brain, is our field and research methods, which is basically a course on wetland delineation. So we take students through the entire process of how to evaluate a wetland, if it is healthy, if it needs help, how do we go through the technical state and EPA definitions of what a wetland is. Students get to go out and do fish counts, vegetative counts. We do soil surveys. It's really a lot of fun. But the whole point of this class is the students are going to pick a location near them, and they walk through the entire assessment array in the wetland delineation scheme the entire semester. And they come up with different methodologies to help restore these places and help bring that ecosystem back to where it needs to be. These are just some snapshots from students' projects last semester, one of which student was working next to a metal scrapyard. So there was a lot of ecological help, right, that this place needed, a lot of pollution. And the students are learning how to use plants for, say, phytoremediation, right? And learning how to, like I said, work with nature so that way we can repair these ecosystems into the future in a much more sustainable way instead of just put some engineered structure, right, out there. The other class that's kind of the capstone class is my coastal restoration class. So this class helps students develop coastal restoration projects. And we develop the projects through the QWPRA lens. So QWPRA is the Coastal Wetlands Planning, Protection, and Restoration Act. I've only said it like 400 times in my life. That's the only reason why I can remember it. But this is the federal agency, right, that does coastal restoration, right? CPRA, the Coastal Restoration and Protection Authority, is our state agency, right, that does coastal restoration. So I'm training students on how to do the federal route because they could go anywhere, right? Of course, I want students to stay here, but they can go anywhere and apply these methods. And so really we walk students through how do you even know where a project should be, what kind of projects are there, and how do you propose a project, how do you manage a project, how do you figure out a budget, the whole gambit, which is actually much more than any one person would do for a coastal restoration project, but it's really important that students understand the entire aspect of it. And so for this class, students are literally proposing a project, putting it in the QWPRA presentation format, and I'm proud to say 3 of my 4 students from last semester are actually working on proposing these to QWPRA itself as full projects, which is really exciting. So just to kind of give you an idea, and here's some 3 snapshots from 3 of the 4. The only reason why it wasn't 4 of the 4 students is the 4th student is 86. So, which I thought was also pretty awesome in and of itself. If we can go back just one sec. So the top slide on the upper right, I had a student propose bringing red mangroves in to some of the outermost reaches in Bay Adams. So red mangroves are not native here, right? But they are in Florida and can go all the way up the coast in some spots up to Georgia. And this is something that a lot of restoration practitioners have been talking about on the side. So it was really cool to see a student just propose it and just dive into it. And so these students, like I say, kind of walk through the whole methodology and the reasons why. And it was really great because she proposed it kind of way out on the edge by Barrier Islands because she used her Jurassic Park knowledge. If things run amok, we know that sea level is going to take it anyway, which is sad and realistic, right? All at the same time. I had another student who's actually a site manager for Pontchartrain Conservancy propose an addition to our CRIMS locations. So these are monitoring stations that are located around the coast. And she suggested adding in some sound recording as well, because there's a lot of really interesting work that's coming out that you can even identify species of plants coming through the ground by sound, and you can identify them without trampling, without even seeing them. And that would be a really amazing addition. And then the last student here, maybe you've heard of Mardi Gras Pass before, but that's a crevasse that opened up quite a few years ago, bringing a lot of fresh water out into the system. Well, these areas can be kind of vulnerable, right, when hurricanes come in. And so I have a student that works in the aquaponics space over at the center in Harvey, and she wants to take cut grass and increase their salinity tolerance, so that way maybe they can withstand in some of these vulnerable new places, be able to hold on to that ground. So I thought these were just really great examples of students working with nature instead of hard engineered structures, right, bringing in the marsh buggies and the dredge pipes, right, really working with what we have to try to push things forward. Okay, next slide. So now what do we do, right? I just kind of told you what we talk about, but what do we physically do? So one shining star of our program, I don't like to sit still. It's just my personality. I kind of work with everybody. So we've gotten our fingers into the welding department, which is pretty cool. And our welding students get paid as an internship to build these living oyster reef baskets. So they do it over the summer. They get to make money. They get to put it on their resume that they've got all of this work experience. But then we physically deploy these out in the Chandeleur Sound. And the idea is as this contains oysters, you're going to get new oysters that are going to come on top of it, build a nice big reef, so that way when storm surges come in and hits those living shorelines, it's going to disperse that wave energy. So pretty cool to bring in welding, things that they never thought that they would do, right, in their entire life. Pretty cool. We also do a lot of work with a lot of nonprofits around. I do work with Pontchartrain Conservancy, do work with the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana, Restore Retreat. And as I'm sure you guys have noticed as students, it's really hard for a professor to just be able to say, okay, I'm going to go build this project here and we're just going to go do it. Because there's land ownership and permits and money and all kinds of stuff. So it's generally easier to hook up with nonprofits and really just help them do the awesome work that they're already doing. And so out in Plaquemines Parish, we have quite a few mangrove fields out on some of these barrier islands and out on the farther reaches. So we help with mangrove propagule collection and propagation. And what you can see here on the bottom picture is we're kind of out. This is near an indigenous mound out in Plaquemines Parish, putting more of those propagules out so we can get more mangroves. Mangroves are really important because A, they store an immense amount of carbon, but B, they're nematophores, they're root structures that kind of come up like straws through that salt water. Can withstand, right, all of that salinity that comes in during hurricanes, but also it can help accrete material so they can grow as sea level rises. So they're really good at keeping up with that. And then in that same location, we also help deploy a living shoreline. Again, another oyster reef situation, but this is protecting an indigenous mound and working with the indigenous community. I don't just stay in the parishes that I'm supposed to stay in. I kind of work everywhere. I do a lot of work in the center part down in Terrebonne and Lafourche Parish as well. I'm very lucky that I get to teach in Leadership Terrebonne. I get to do their Environment Day. It's a lot of fun. But again, this is also just education for the community. So in that bottom right picture, you know, we go out and we do marsh grass planting, but you can see there on the very edge, that's a company that's called Cajun Coral, right, which is helping build a living shoreline. So it's a little different because it's not the oysters, but it's the same material, that calcium carbonate, that new baby oysters need, so that way they can make, right, their shell and keep their deliciousness inside for us to eventually enjoy. But all these other pictures here, this was some work we did out in Pointe-aux-Chenes and out in Leeville, again, building these living shorelines around these places that really need that protection from wave action. And then last, as I mentioned, it's really hard for professors, right, to just bring y'all out and live our dreams when we want to do experiments. So I bought 10.5 acres so I can just do that with my students. Kind of went to the extreme there. But this is down in Plaquemines Parish. That top picture, right, I bring students out. We do a lot of planting, so we talk about, right, the importance of using native species. And also the importance of, when we're going out and collecting these seeds, collecting them from places that have been inundated with salt water pretty recently. So that way we know that these plants have a little bit more hardiness to them. So I work with the students in growing. This is actually my backyard. I had last year about 3,000 cypress trees. This year I've got about 1,200, all on my own time and dime. But it's really, that's the part that's important in getting students out to do this work. So, of course, you're always welcome to contact me anytime. I love talking to students, and looking forward to our conversation in a few minutes.
All right, thank you all very much for having me. I'm Corey Miller. I'm the Community Engagement Director for Pontchartrain Conservancy. And today I'm just gonna give a very just kind of brief background about myself, a little bit about Pontchartrain Conservancy and the work that we do, and then kind of really focus on our organization's relationship, if you would, with nature-based solutions in kind of 3 larger categories. So I, as mentioned, 3rd generation. All my grandparents were born in New Orleans. I have not traveled far. In fact, I just realized I've lived all my life within the Pontchartrain Basin. And so I went to LSU for undergrads. Back at UNO, my formal education is in, I have a master's of sociology. Again, got that through an assistantship working on sustainability and resilience for coastal communities. Those 2 pictures, growing up, I was fortunate. Top right, we're bringing some furniture down to our camp that was located in the middle of the Barataria Basin. You have to get to by boat. The bottom, I spent my quote-unquote summer camp, was getting dropped off to Grandma and Grandpa. They had a camp down on Grand Isle, which is Louisiana's only inhabited barrier island. My grandfather, in his retirement, supplemented his income with some commercial shrimping, so I was Grandpa's little deckhand. I use this slide because anything I do from now on throughout the rest of the presentation, you're not going to feel, you know, bad for me or criticize me because I got cute baby pictures up there. So the Pontchartrain Basin. So Pontchartrain Conservancy, formerly Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation, were formed back in 1989. The Pontchartrain Basin actually extends into Mississippi, but we just focus on the Louisiana side of the basin, and it's essentially everything that drains out through Lake Pontchartrain out into the estuary and open Gulf, ultimately hydrologically bounded by the Mississippi River and the Pearl River on the other side. So again, that is the depiction of the Pontchartrain Basin. It touches on 16 different parishes in that area. Our organization works towards environmental sustainability and having a prosperous, resilient region. We do that through kind of a 3-pronged approach of scientific research, education, and advocacy. So our organization kind of structurally is divided into 2 main programmatic areas. We have our science program and a science director who oversees that, essentially working through water quality issues and challenges within the basin, and then also promoting coastal restoration and sustainability. Our community program, which I am the director of, really is kind of our outward-facing programming where we do education both on-site at our education facility, then also off-site with students, educators, and we have an ever-growing kind of community science program as well. So in kind of thinking about, how do I define or how do I think our organization defines or approaches nature-based solutions, I was very tempted to just Google and see what everybody else has written about it, but I didn't do that, so I just kind of put this in my own words. To me, it's working synergistically with nature to address environmental issues, and it can be kind of a very broad terminology, and there's lots of different ways to approach that. I think the ways that our organization really stands out or gravitates to are, restoring those natural processes. We've done a lot of damage to our coast in the name of trying to persist where Mother Nature would not have had us persist otherwise. Rebuilding those key landscape features, restoring the habitat, and then using natural native materials. This is a depiction of what is coined the multiple lines of defense strategy for coastal protection. A researcher while at Pontchartrain Conservancy came up with this strategy, and actually the state of Louisiana through their coastal master plan process has adopted this strategy as kind of like the underlying approach to how we do coastal restoration. And it can really be broken into three main types of activities. Going from the Gulf towards the city centers, really working on those nature-based solutions and those approaches. So making sure that we restore habitat and we restore key landscape features like barrier islands as the first line of defense to knock down storm surge. Working with the historic footprint where natural ridges used to occur across bayous, or along bayous rather, that used to be connected to the Mississippi River. Working with processes like reconnecting the Mississippi River to make sure that we have that full estuarine gradient that Jacqueline talked about that helps support not only a heightened level of protection from storm surge, but helps support the entire salinity regime that we need for the whole seafood platter, so to speak. As we go towards the city centers, we get towards our more structural lines of defense like floodgates and big earthen or concrete levees. And then there's decisions that community members can make on their own or residents can make as far as having an evacuation plan, elevating their home. So the overall level of defense is really only as strong as each one of those components. I often use an analogy of like a three-leg stool. So it's not going to stand right if all the legs aren't working at the same level. So I'm sure you've seen and talked about the progression, or rather evolution, of the greater New Orleans region. This area was very much so not ideal for inhabitable land. We have done a whole lot of engineering to try to make it so, and a lot of that has been trying to fight nature. And so I really think it's important to understand that background, to understand kind of this ever-growing shift towards, all right, we went way too far in one direction. How do we start to correct, and how do we actually start to embrace what the system naturally would look like, what it wants to do in order to continue living here into the future? So you can see this is a much later depiction of the area in the early 1990s. Where you see development is largely the harder ground closer to the Mississippi River. Still, a lot of that area, which now is all subdivisions and homes and infrastructure, businesses, schools, churches, that was swamp. That did not want to be that, had no intention of it. But we made a lot of decisions to try to tame all of that in order for the area to grow and to develop the economic prosperity that we've been afforded by not only the Mississippi River, but all of the rich resources that we have along our coast. And so one of the things that our organization has done over the years is we have a lot of success working with large-scale projects or larger interventions and trying to find out what is kind of like our value added to that. So two examples of that kind of approach. We have a very robust swamp habitat restoration program where we've planted tens of thousands, if not into the hundred thousands of cypress trees and other trees over the past 15 years or so of our organization. We recently did some analysis and looks at 70,000 of those trees. So two areas, yeah, go ahead. Two areas of significance. Those two areas that you saw in the previous map are two areas where we have a very, very high concentration of cypress and other tree plantings. One of them is all the way up here at the top left. So there's what's called the Maurepas Land Bridge. It's the area, it's the area in between Lake Maurepas and Lake Pontchartrain. So in what I call a quasi nature-based solution, following Hurricane Katrina, there was a big momentum to close what is coined the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet. The Mr. Go is how it's typically used, the acronym. And so you could see this satellite zoomed in image where they simply dumped a bunch of rocks into this formerly useful, questionably useful shipping channel that was built to have a shortcut to not have to go through the meandering mouth of the Mississippi River to get to New Orleans city center. Not going to go into all the history of that, but as you can imagine, that created a direct route for salt water on an everyday tide to get further and further into the system, changing the salinity regime that now made it no longer habitable for cypress trees to naturally regenerate or to live at all. So by dumping these rocks in there and preventing that everyday tidal exchange, we're now able to plant cypress trees all the way up in the top left-hand corner of this image here that are now naturally regenerating. So that's one of the areas where working with kind of that effort to restore the natural flow and the natural order of how our waterways work and our estuary should work, we're able to now restore critical swamp habitat that acts as, lots of different things as far as storm surge reduction, habitat for species. One of the other areas that we plant and have had a lot of success is this area called Carnarvon Diversion. It's on the border between St. Bernard and Plaquemines on the east bank of the river. You can see right there an intake structure in the river that's allowing muddy Mississippi River to flow into this area. As a result, that area now has a sustainable or a consistent amount of fresh water that we're able to do a lot of good work and good cypress tree planting out there. Next. So over a 10-year period, we've monitored all subsequent plantings every year in those two areas. Not going to go into all the results, but there's a paper by Eva Hillman that was published last year that talks about comparing and contrasting those two different areas. Obviously, shocker, the area that is very close to freshwater freshwater inputs from that diversion by far exceed any other growth rates that we see along the coast. So, you could go through the rest of these. So this is just some pictures of us planting cypress trees and the activities. This gentleman is a short little video. We have to put these tree protectors. You saw some of those in some of Jacqueline's pictures. Otherwise, nutria loved, they're herbivores. They love to eat tender little growing things in their juvenile stage. They love to just chew up cypress trees. So we've learned the hard way. Those are an integral part. All right, so shifting gears, another project that we come in and supplement on. So this is the Bucktown area of Metairie. You can see historically it was very much just a natural interface. There's a highway right here. Obviously, all of these structures are all elevated to accommodate high tides and a little bit above high tides, still very vulnerable. Well, after repeated hurricanes and in efforts to make this area more secure, we transformed it to look like this. And so you went from a very natural kind of gradient, living with the water, with the tides, to essentially completely cutting off the residents from the tides and coming up with this rocked, no trees, no natural vegetation. And so one effort that has recently occurred is Bucktown Living Shoreline Project. So you can see, you can go back one more. So yeah, so you can see this is a 1998 picture compared to 2001. The two things to really point out is that kind of corner of dredge material right there that's been placed. On the outside of that is a boardwalk. Then they kind of also added a lot of buffer and a lot of kind of beefed up that peninsula there as well. And so our organization has come in and over the years in the course of evolution of this project, done a lot to first initially plant some of the species that was in that reclaimed marsh area. We've monitored the progression, the natural evolution of how that area has, how many species were there originally when they were planted, how has that evolved, what are the dominant species, what are the growth rates of the cypress and those types of things. Most recently though, what we did is a project on that peninsula where we identified like based on elevation, so it's a kind of a very just like a peninsula it goes from water elevation up to probably plus 8 feet, 10 feet, down back to water elevation. Next slide, please. So what we did is we identified the right appropriate types of plants to plant along that marsh interface, a more swampy intertidal interface, the maritime forest, so where we have oak trees and other hardier species like mulberries. And so we used this area, which was otherwise just basically barren grass and rock, to come in and not just plant a demonstration project, but plant according to the types of species that would naturally occur in those areas. One anecdotal thing is we do a bird walk every Thursday from 4 to 5. And we've been documenting an ever increasing number of species that we're seeing just through anecdotal citizen or science kind of. Next. So this is some pictures of planting that oak ridge. So we partnered with Glass Half Full, which is the philanthropic side of, Glass Roots, which is the philanthropic side of Glass Half Full, the glass recycling effort that's here locally. So those are actually bags of recycled crushed glass that's the size of sand that you would naturally find. And we've got volunteers to plant marsh grasses in those, which have rooted, and it's now, I wish I had a current picture, but all right, I just have one more slide, I think. And then so one of the other areas that we do a lot of work in nature-based solutions is in green infrastructure. These are a couple of pictures of us working with schools. We'll do like a kind of combined approach of going into the classroom, working with the teachers to work within their curriculum, work with the students to identify trouble spots on their campuses, and then actually design projects and get some plants in the ground. And I'll go ahead and stop there.
Thank you.
Yep.
So thank you both for being here and having this conversation with us. I think one of the things I wanted to start with is I think nature-based solutions has a reputation sometimes of being expensive, and kind of that is used as a reason not to explore it. What do you have to say about the cost of some of these different scale projects?
Okay, first.
I think it can be expensive, but I think arguably the benefits that you get amongst like many different aspects. So yeah, it's very easy to go ahead and say we need to keep Lake Pontchartrain out of the communities that are just on the other side of it. And so let's just build a big mound and throw a bunch of rocks there. Well, spending the extra dollar, the extra time to do more of like what they've done out at Bucktown, you're not only like, you're now adding an extra line of defense, there's an extra buffer in front of that levee. So waves that do come in are not just tearing directly at the levee. So you're adding extra protection, but then you're adding habitat for native species, you're adding a recreational value by pairing it with like a boardwalk and getting people out there. It's a teaching tool. We bring school groups and adults out there all the time. And so I think there's an argument to be made that spending the extra dollar or extra 50 cents in going with a nature-based project or strategy pays off in many other ways. And it's often hard to quantify and put a dollar figure on those ways.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, you know, when I teach students about these projects, restoration projects, like man-made stuff, is only meant to last 20 years. And when we do nature-based solutions, it's sustainable beyond those 20 years. So if you're working with that natural cycle and adding to it and making it more, you know, useful and reconnecting things, I don't know how you put a dollar value on that, because it's expensive in the front end, but it's going to keep going well past any, you know, project life that we would normally have. So I think it saves money in the long run.
Yeah.
You've talked about, I was thinking particularly for yourself, Jacqueline, that you bought land so that you could do these projects, some projects. What do you think are some of the regulatory hurdles to nature-based projects?
Well, I think for just to start with any coastal restoration project is land ownership. That is like by far the biggest hurdle, because you know a lot of these places, I'm doing some work right now on a project that's in the central wetlands unit, and that has been traditionally very difficult to tell who owns the land, so you can even contact those owners, see what you could do. We are going all the way back to the Spanish land grants to figure out who owns this stuff. And so that ends up being kind of one of the major hurdles to even just start anything. And then of course, right, looking at a lot of those environmental impacts, depending upon, you know, where you're building a project, what you're trying to do, and what that looks like on the other end. So for me, you know, I'm not doing giant coastal restoration projects with my students, but really just trying to get some of that foundational understanding of processes down, so that way they can take that and then build upon it. And then also, I don't want to expose them to a lot of these predetermined restoration projects, because I want them to come up with their own ideas and their own solutions, because we're so good at doing the same thing over and over again, right? I want students to kind of bring in that new stuff. So it's just easy. I've got a student doing a moth survey, you know, right now at my property, and it's also just really cool to see students being innovative and having the space to do that.
Is there a particular project or plant that people are investigating that you're excited about? You kind of said the red mangroves, bringing them over, but is there anything else that you're excited about right now?
I mean, I'm always excited about cypress trees, just because they're my favorite and they're beautiful. But you know, really playing a lot with the salinity gradients and the salinity tolerance of plants. Like I said, I'm really fortunate that a student in my program is a technician at the Aquaculture Center over in Harvey. And so she's got some access to try taking some of these plants, slowly increasing the salinity of water they're in to see what they can tolerate, to see what they can do. So maybe we can push those envelopes. And so, like I said, plants like cutgrass are showing some promise. Things like cypress, we can get them to handle a little bit more. And so that'll just help us overall, you know, with the resiliency of our coast.
Anything you're excited about right now, Corey?
Yeah, you know, we have some plans to expand. So I didn't mention that at the lighthouse, which I had some pictures in there. We use that as an education center where we do a lot of STEM programming. We've got some funding recently and some plans to actually expand some of our teaching gardens. So we have a pollinator garden on site. We have a native bioswale. We're going to be expanding some of those areas. And so it's nice to have those demonstrations where we could bring kids, do the PowerPoint presentation, but then bring them outside and walk through a garden and show them the impacts. So.
Does anyone have any questions? I'll open it up to the audience for a moment. I can keep going. Phil.
I was interested in your avenues towards collaboration from other institutes, selfishly. I'm a psychologist to study algae, and recently I've been looking into phytoplankton changes and correlating with water quality. I have contacted the Pontchartrain Conservancy lightly.
Okay.
I would love to talk further. So if you, I guess I'm wondering, is there an initiative to work on bottom of food web things aquatically below the plants even for the Conservancy? If you know, I know it's more the science side, but
yeah.
I figured I'd ask.
Yeah. So we do have a robust water quality monitoring program where we have, I think, 24 years of data now, and we measure every Tuesday a dozen places around the perimeter of Lake Pontchartrain. We don't have any algae monitoring programs in place currently, but I can connect you with our people in our water quality department. We're always looking for innovative ideas.
I have a few.
Yeah. And so we like partnering with universities as well and trying to find those collaborations. So,
Awesome. We'll talk about it.
Absolutely.
trying to put the right picture behind, sorry. Can't export in that. One of the questions I also had about this particular is nature-based design is why do you think we're acting like it's new?
Go ahead.
There's a lot to unpack there. You know, especially like capitalistic ideas, there's a lot to unpack there. And I think a lot of it is just the hubris of man. You know, we think that we can control the planet. We think that we can make it do what we want it to do. And I mean, if Katrina didn't teach us a lesson about that, I don't know what ever will. You know, we can, in some instances, help guide nature back to what it needs to be. And that's really the direction we need to be going, instead of just thinking that we can solve all the problem with concrete and rebar.
What places are you finding to financially support your projects that are nature-based? Where would you recommend that students start to look for financial support for their research and grants opportunities?
So sometimes it's in the obvious places like National Academy of Sciences, National Science Foundation, some of those groups. Sometimes it's in the less obvious places. We've had a lot of success in attaching it to the education component. So we're not like gonna save Southeast Louisiana's, stormwater flooding issues by putting a garden in at Alice Burney Public School in Jefferson Parish, but we're taking an active approach to like really demonstrating how these projects can cumulatively really help to change and address some of these issues. So like in kind of those combined education grants, I think you could find, so it's finding the right source to the right project, I guess.
That reminds me of when we had Greenlight would talk about their barrels and how each barrel only collects so many gallons, but if you have enough of them across New Orleans, it's helping solve some of our problems of flooding. Any other questions in the rest?
How does like the market for commercial like seafood affect your projects?
Boy, do you have another hour?
Gosh, that's a really good question. So there is, high level, there is an inherent contention between some of the restoration strategies that aim to revert the environmental landscape back to conditions which previously existed, whereas in the current conditions you have people harvesting things like shrimp and oysters in areas that naturally would not be harvestable areas. And so there is a lot of contention that goes on between restoration priorities and commercial seafood interest priorities. The trick and the area that I kind of gravitate to is like asking the question, okay, if we know that this is the scenario in which we're going to have the most protection for our communities and preserving our culture, how do we make sure that we can bring those commercial fishers along and have them vision themselves in that future changed environment? What are the tools they need? What are the policies they need in place in order to transition to kind of a more restored environment? So.
And just to add on to that for a minute, and I feel like this is also part of my job, especially at a community college, is like Corey said, there's a lot of contention, but there's been a lot of distrust between like academic institutions and the fishing community. And a lot of it is for good reason, right? A lot of times we go out and say we're going to get community engagement, and get their opinions, but we're really just box checking, right? And so where I'm at, I'm trying to teach students, okay, when we go out, when we make maps, when we do this work, we have to hear the public. It's like all my students are trained in facilitation, thanks to Corey's suggestion. He's on my advisory board. But they're trained to be able to go out and talk to people in the community to actually hear what they're saying, not what they're looking for, but what they're actually saying, and bringing it into a project. Because sometimes in order for a project to be successful in the long run, we might have to pull it back a little bit to meet the needs of the community, but that's okay if we're A, working together, B, rebuilding that trust, and C, actually getting a project on the ground.
I guess this is more of a philosophical question, but professional hazard as a philosopher, so I'm just sort of wondering how you're thinking about nature-based solutions versus non-nature-based solutions. So like levees, Corey seemed to give an example of like a non-natural solution. Levees are of course natural, we just build them up. How is that not following nature? And then in your case, mangroves, which are non-native species, I know the hardiness zones are changing with climate change, but sort of how are we differentiating natural versus non-natural solutions? And you clearly seem to think that the nature-based solutions are sort of better. So I'm just kind of curious of what are the reasons why?
Specific to the levees, if I had a time machine, I'd go back to the decision to levy off the Mississippi River in the fashion that it is. I would have been waving my arm, shouting like, absolutely not. Let me tell you what happens in that scenario 100 years from now. So at the end of the day, we're not just going to solve it with nature-based solutions. We're going to have engineered projects. There are several areas along the coast where it makes sense to dump a bunch of rocks that is obviously not from around this area anywhere near here to prevent significant collapse of, say, two water bodies from becoming one big large water body. And then so I think, and the same thing with levees, when the especially where they already exist, we've kind of put ourselves in a situation where we need to maintain them. But I'll let Jacqueline talk to you.
Yeah, no, I think the caveat is we no longer live in a natural environment. We live in an engineered environment. So how do we engineer our way out of an engineered environment and back to a natural environment, right? That's tricky. That's something we haven't really done and we're not really good at doing. But I think we're in that fortunate and unfortunate situation at the same time. We know we're up against a lot here, right, with sea level rise. We know we're going to get 18 inches of sea level rise in 24 years. That is terrifying, right? So at the same time, that affords us, hopefully the impetus to get some work done. But also, if we, like I said with my student with the red mangroves, if we mess up, hate to say it, it's going to go away. Right? So we're almost provided the sandbox to be able to play in to figure out the right solutions. So that way it's not just saving Louisiana, it can be, deployed across the coastline of the entire country. That was a good question though.
So I was, I'm helped with CRCL with tree planting, and one of the one of the volunteers that were there, they brought up, so we're going into an effort to help restore wetlands, but we are planting mangroves and cypress and tupelo. What their concern was, this is not happening naturally. Mm-hmm. We're adding this to the, we're again engineering the system, and it should be something that's happening naturally. They would like to see it happening more naturally. And so their concern is it won't be successful because it's not happening naturally. What are your thoughts on that?
So I actually had one of my very first students, sorry to just jump in.
No.
One of my very first students, 20 years ago, her and I did a lot of CRCL plantings. And she did her whole master's degree on the efficacy of those plantings. And I hate to say, they aren't very successful in the long run. It's more of an outreach tool, right? Doesn't mean we shouldn't stop doing it. But I think what we need to do and what we get caught up in sometimes is we plant a lot of end game species, right? Cypress trees, oak trees, tupelo, those are great, but that's end game, right? If we are planting a new area, we need to plant, I hate using the term pioneer species because it's colonial, but that's the word we use, right? So we need to be planting willow maybe to start with and come back in and do another planting and keep moving that succession along the way it should be. So I agree that we probably do need to switch our thinking, but a lot of that ends up being, I hate to say political, because the master plan is looking at acres built. They want to see the trees, they want to see the end game, and we're so impatient as humans to be like, okay, I want this land to be here now. I want these trees here now. But maybe it's going to take past our lifetime to get to those cypress trees. So I do think we need to be a little bit more careful in how we do that succession.
And I would just add, so I very briefly alluded to that 10-year, 70,000 trees planted across 2 zones. I want to say across both of those zones, all those years, we maybe had 20% mortality or less. So 70,000 trees, 20% mortality, we still put, 54,000 trees that are surviving out. So the numbers can, and Yeah, there is a lot of learning that goes into it, but and it is one of the more difficult things is to have the foresight and have the right funder that's going to pay for you to go back out 5 years after you've implemented a project and monitor it. So all those things need to be factored into when you're doing these proposals.
Having said that, by the way, they're planting in the central wetlands tomorrow and Saturday. They're looking for volunteers.
Yes.
That's a good plug.
We're going to still continue to take questions, but I want to kind of be aware that we're wrapping towards when some students might need to go. And so one thing before they leave us, if some of them do, you're at nonprofit. Many of our students see that as their future. You work with people who are working, which I think is really wonderful. What skills do you need? Would you recommend they go out and get right now? What is needed for the workforce that you are seeing right now in restoration and your field?
Yeah, that's a great question because I'm actually on an NSF grant right now to investigate that. So I'm actually building an environmental technician and marine technician program, like 1-year certifications. Marine technicians are the people right out on the boats doing all the sonar work, which like who wouldn't want to be on a boat all the time? So I would say, if you're really trying to look into this, find that niche trackway and get those technical skills because that part's important. Learning how to read data, learning how to take good data when you're out in the field and what that means is really important. Learning how to manage that data is really important. But also having the communication skills. Like, we talked about earlier, being able to hear what other people are saying, taking yourself out of your own personal feelings and hearing people and learning how to work with them and incorporate those ideas. I feel like that's hard to train people on, but a really important skill to build.
And I'll just add to it, before I started in a nonprofit and an environmental nonprofit, I probably had a very skewed or false kind of assumption that like, oh, you have to have an environmental degree to work on environmental issues or work for an environmental nonprofit. But when in fact it's, accounting, communications, development, I come at it with a social science background. So I bring like the entire okay, it's great that we're doing in-house science and we're learning more and more about these issues. How do we actually bring that to the community and engage the community both on embracing whatever the science is, but also on participating in their own advocacy, and so I think it's like kind of like a yes and question sometimes. It's like, yes, I'm interested in environmental studies, but what else do I, or what avenue do I want to build upon that to ultimately make an impact or find your niche?
Wonderful. Questions from the audience? Yeah. Go ahead.
So Dr. Del Bianco had asked earlier about like the costs related with these nature-based solutions. I guess I have a question kind of coming from the opposite direction. So governmental organization, non-governmental organization. So there's kind of a lot of bureaucracy. In the fall we had Councilman Van Bracken who was talking about the living coast between Bucktown and Bonneville. I've kayaked there. Never seen another soul kayaking every time I've been there. And they built a bridge and ADA accessible kayak launch, all good in a certain way, bigger parking lots. But it was like $113 million, and I'm about as big an environmentalist as you can come. And it's like, wow, that's really expensive. But NGOs often want. And she was a kind of the price tag was a positive, not a negative, because she was seeking matching funds. So I'm just kind of wondering, in what ways do you think the sort of bureaucracy of the government side, and then on the sort of perverse incentive on the NGOs to want to sort of attract as big as grants as possible, maybe being an obstacle? Because nature-based solutions, in principle, could be actually really cheap. We can make them really expensive.
So my gut reaction to that is like, I think, yes, it oftentimes these projects are over-engineered, overspent. They're, and you think to yourself, oh, wow, we could do that so much cheaper. I think the other side of that, or like what has to be swallowed with that, is until you provide proof of concept and get people actually to see the benefits, it's hard to then go like, okay, it would be so much cheaper if we did this along a 5-mile stretch at once versus let's do less than a mile or however long that stretch is. So I think that there is kind of that inherent into that is demonstration before you could get really scalable.
Yeah, and I think like part of that problem too is, all the restoration projects we do have to fit inside the scope of the master plan, which is great, right? Because we want all of that synergy happening. But at the same time, those projects are selected out of the master plan for how much acreage they build, right? So that's kind of like already artificially selecting really big projects. Whereas like this is part of why I like QIPRA, because it funds a lot of those smaller projects that are just as meaningful. Maybe it's not building 200 acres of land, but restoring the hydrology between, two basins is equally as important, but not as flashy. So I think sometimes, like I said, those projects are just artificially selected because of the master plan process. Any question?
I know you guys have spoken like the longevity of like the nature-based solutions versus the non-nature-based solutions. I guess my question would be, will there ever be a time where the coast is saved? Like, will there ever be a time where the work is kind of like, okay, we're not working to save the coast, but now it's just to maintain what we've done?
Boy, I'd love to get to that part.
I'd love to work myself out of a job. No, and I think one of the important things that when I typically give kind of like the Coastal Restoration 101 presentation, we do a lot of presenting on the state's efforts in their coastal master plan, which takes a 50-year view. If we spent $50 billion, what would that get us at the end of the day? And it's important to remind people that, yeah, we're kind of leading the nation in having such a scientific-based plan and implementation process. But at the end of the day, all that does is try to hang on to as much land as possible, given the current constraints and the current environmental conditions. If we really want to save the coast, we need to address climate change. And so the master plan does nothing to address climate change. It just tries to hang on to as much land as long as possible. So, yeah.
This is just for my own interest, I guess. Will like the AI data centers contribute to any of these issues at all?
Contribute negatively or positively?
Yeah, it's two sides.
I mean, positively, it could help with like large data analysis and pulling together, those types of things. I mean, obviously, the very negative impact is just energy consumption and what that does on climate change.
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot, especially by members of my advisory board, what I'm going to bring AI in. And the thing is, like, if we engineered our way into these problems, right, whether we're talking about pollution, the global climate change issue, very specifically our coast, we can figure out how to get out of it. We know how to get out of it. I mean, I think we all in this room know what we need to do to address climate change. It's just, are we going to actually do it? And I don't think AI is going to force anybody to actually do it. Yeah.
This is a really random side note. I know AI, especially in my generation, has been very, what's the word I'm looking for? Used, I suppose. But there is this app and AI called Ecosia where they plant trees based on uses. And they've been doing it for like 10 years. It's been around for a while. I recently switched to it. And if you go on like the Instagram and their website, they have all the data proven that they've planted and that they're doing it for the right reasons. So I think just a recommendation, if you were to implement AI, something along those lines would be really cool, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think like carbon banking, which is kind of like what that sounds like, is a really interesting idea, right? And a really cool concept. I think sometimes politically it can become a very slippery slope, right, on how that is managed, especially like carbon credits and all that kind of stuff. But I do think that's at least a step in the right direction. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
I feel like you touched on this a bit, but some of the work I've done in the community back home, a lot of the projects we've planned, we've just like halfway through found that we just can't keep up with the pace of degradation in our environment. So how do you go about like planning with a community that has kind of like isn't seeing a real outcome in projects and really trying to figure out solutions to that long term?
You touched on that idea of distrust when science comes in. Do you think that there are particular strategies that have worked well in your projects?
So I'm on a small project right now, like I said, kind of working in the Central Wetlands Unit along Bayou Bienvenue. And this whole project is coming in the mind of like, okay, we know we need to save, air quotes sake, save this area, right? Restore this. I hate the word restore because you can't restore something back to what it was because the environmental conditions are all different, right? But we didn't have an end game in mind. So we knew we needed to do work there, but we didn't come at it like, okay, we know we're going to dredge, we know we're going to do these things. We brought the whole issue to the community, had maps up, and let the community quite literally guide where this is going to go. Like, what structures do you want to see? What community features do you want to see? What can we do to make this area more resilient? And so I think we need to get better about true community-led restoration. And sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow on the academic end because it's like, okay, I know if we did this other thing, it would make it so much more effective, right? And that can be a struggle. But if you don't have the community with you, you're not going to do the project anyway. So as I said, I think if we can start really moving towards those directions of true community-led projects, we're going to see more success and be able to build on that success.
What she said.
I think also I'm on a similar project working with Pontchartrain Conservancy, and we are also using maps in the community and letting them, this one's for flood mitigation, but it's letting the community members mark where the flooding is happening and where they would want to monitor. And I think that our ability now to share map, GPS data, GIS is really improved to a point where most people are comfortable with a Google map at this point, that I think that is enhancing some of our environmentally based projects overall. Because we can get community input in a very precise and understandable way. Everybody kind of makes a map of their community. Any final questions?
Moving to the education side, your courses and designs and modules are extremely inspiring. We encourage/require some of our tracks in biology and environment programs to do outside Loyola courses. I was wondering/hoping if you were offering these things in summertime time frames, some of the classes that you were describing?
Yeah. No, traditionally, but no, that's definitely a conversation we could have. And I will say that most of the classes inside my program are in the evening because most of our students work during the day, whether it's in the industry or not. And so I've actually had some like UNO students come because it fits. So there definitely could be a way that we could make it work for sure.
Awesome. Let's check that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
All right. Well, I want to thank you again for joining us today in this roundtable. Our next one will be March 6th with our own Dr. Chris Torres talking with us. And then our final one will be, I think it's April 13th during Earth Week. So I look forward to you all joining us. Please stay and go upstairs to the greenhouse for the greenhouse tour and sun gazing. You probably have been stargazing, but have you ever been sun gazing? So that'll be offered. And can we thank our speakers one more time for coming?
Thank you.